Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is a cranberry... I'm going to read it to you. Naturally flavored Cape Cod cranberry fruit tea from Upton Tea Imports. So it's a bit of a mouthful. And the funny thing is that cranberry is the only flavor listed, but it's the third ingredient out of 3. So you got apple bits, hibiscus, and cranberry. But okay, I'll take what I can get. I chose this one, well, because I'm in the mood for it, but also because Cape Cod is mentioned in that long title. And one of the books I have here today takes place in Cape Cod. Is it in Cape Cod or on Cape Cod? I'm having trouble with that. But I'm doing a tea mystery, and as often happens with me, I don't read quite as many mysteries in the summer, even though they're perfectly good any time of year. But I guess I do associate cozy mysteries, especially, or any mysteries really, with sitting in an armchair. On an armchair? In an armchair? Yeah, it's that day. Yeah, being cozy and in from the cold and drinking warm liquids. But I mean, you could read any of these on the beach. I don't know. You decide. Or not. So anyway, I'm going to talk about these 3 books, and 2 of them are Sherlock Holmes heavy, but they're no Arthur Conan Doyle, so I don't have my Sherlock Holmes mugs. I have 2 mugs that are Sherlock Holmes. I will have them again soon, even if I don't read Sherlock Holmes, but not today. And the first one, I'm going to see how it's been a little backed up, because I'm doing this in September, and I started reading this book for Jane Austen July. It didn't fit in with any of the challenges, but I just thought, I need to be reading mysteries every month. And so no matter what challenge I do, mysteries have to find their way in. No matter what. So I got this Jane and the Unpleasantness at Scargrave Manor. And it is being the first Jane Austen mystery by Stephanie Barron. And I've heard of them before, I just hadn't read them yet, and I thought, well, this is the time. It was before my libraries started opening. They're not all completely open, but at least they're somewhat usable now for me. And so I ordered this online. I don't know if I'll do that for the rest of the series, even though it was good. It was a good book, but I don't think it merits buying every book in the series. Let's see. This is I don't know if these are all the Jane Austen books. I think they are, but many of them at least must be. So there's a big list. And so if I start buying them, I'm not going to have space for them. But if I find them someday in Book Off for like $1, which I'll talk about this maybe another time, but I'm in a semi-book buying ban right now. So I'm not passing by Book Off. But in the future, if I see another one of these books, it could happen, but I'm not counting on it because I don't remember ever seeing these books in Book Off. Enough said. Now, these books are basically Jane Austen as the character instead of the author. This is when she had written some books, but she had definitely not published yet. And it's funny because I think most people who are maybe not the top tier Jane Austen fans that are, that will travel to every Jane Austen site and go to every convention and has Regency clothing, that they'll do any of these things anyway, probably. But like above people who like to read Jane Austen, but are just cool with having read a few of her novels and watching the movies, and that's great, and that's perfectly fine. I'm somewhere in the middle, I think, where I read all her novels and perfectly happy with reading them more than once. And also, once I was through with the 6 main novels, I wanted to read whatever else she had. And got as much as I could. And when I pretty much read everything that she had written, I might have missed something, but then I started getting into pastiches, sequels, that kind of thing, of her writings. So they were no longer her books, but they were still based on her books, because, you could just never get enough. And then I was reading biographies of her at the same time. So, I couldn't get enough of Jane Austen. And then there's another level, which is Jane Austen as fictional character, which makes sense because, okay, you have someone like Shakespeare, who we know a little bit about, and I don't want to get into the argument of did Shakespeare write Shakespeare, but we know about Shakespeare, but we don't even definitely know when his birthday was. And we know some details about his life and upbringing and where he was at certain times, but we don't know that intimately much about him personally. And I guess about 200 years later, I have to do math live? No. About 200 years later, when Jane Austen was born, there was just maybe more availability because the novel became more of a thing, and there were more letters that were preserved, and maybe because her family kept her memory alive in some ways too, despite the burning of many letters, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But I mean, the only thing they really have in common as far as not knowing that much is that we don't exactly know what Jane Austen looked like because we have just a few drawings that are So, I mean, you can generally get to know certain things about her, but that's it. But we still know more about her than Shakespeare. Shakespeare is still quite a mystery, though not 100%. Though we do know a lot about her biography, and we are certain of certain facts because of certain levels of privacy that people had in those days, and because letters were burnt, there are parts of her life that we don't know a lot about. And probably chunks of time that aren't very well documented just because. Maybe during that time a lot of letters were burned or whatever. Doesn't mean that someone who's really careful couldn't find anything. But she didn't keep, that we know of, a diary. And so that leaves open to people who like to fill in gaps for big fans, the ability to make her a fictional character and to fictionalize parts of her life. She's not a cat. And so this is where something like this would come in. It starts out as someone finding her lost diaries, which, I mean, hey, that would be great if that actually existed, but it turns out she kept records of certain things that happened to her that weren't covered by letters that we know about, or whatever. That's the premise of the story. And this leaves her open to falling into different mysteries that need to be solved. So it kind of goes into more cozy mysteries than detective novels, because she's not a detective, although she does work with certain people who are more in that kind of capacity-ish. But it starts out around the time shortly after when she was living in Bath. Those years, if you know anything about her life. So not a big writing time for her. Her father was still alive, so she was, still in a decent time of her life, but even when she was living in Bath, she would sometimes go to stay with certain people. And at one point she visited friends of hers whose brother proposed to her, and could have been a very nice future as far as money is concerned, but she said yes, and then, I think the next day yes, doggy, I agree. The next day she decided not to go through with it. So this novel opens up around that time. So she's staying with a friend that she made that ended up marrying an earl, and who's much older than her. And while Jane is staying with this woman, Isabel Payne, Countess of Scargrave, that's where it is. I'm just reading the back because names have disappeared. I finished this in early August, so names are leaving me except for Jane Austen. So she's there for approximately around the Christmas time, so it's a bit cold. And while Jane is there, the Earl dies rather terribly. And it could be sickness, but it seems like murder. And Isabel, the now dowager, I guess, countess, is kind of implicated. And so Jane takes it upon herself and is relied upon to get down to what really happened. Now, would this really happen to Jane Austen? Probably not. And one thing I kind of had an objection with is that there are trials and things that happen here that I think would have been recognized, because I know one of Jane's relatives, I think in Bath, had been accused of shoplifting, which was not just a slap on the wrist kind of situation. You could be deported or, transported or something, if found guilty. And that got into the news. That's something that we know about now. So something as far as like a murder would probably be well known. But, you know, you take these things with a grain of salt and say, hey, let's just enjoy the story. I mean, one thing that can be a little more believable, knowing Jane Austen, was that her brothers would be useful in these situations. So she needs to find out something about certain higher-ups in London. She could go to her brother Henry, who was married to Eliza, who had a lot of connections. And then she had certain questions about naval matters. She could go to her two brothers, who are both involved in that. And her other brothers. All of them had some kind of, I wouldn't say pull, but some use in these situations. And knowing how they would be supportive of her writing, for the most part, then maybe they would be also supportive of her in helping find out things. I don't know. So that makes a lot of the things that she does end up being a little more. Somebody's talking outside. This is a problem with having windows open. Hey, you get all the New York life here, you know. Who says it's empty in New York? All right, so yes, it's weird because I was reading it in the warm weather and it's very wintry feeling. But it is cool. There are so many people involved that could have been responsible for this murder and an additional murder that happens. I'm not going to say by who, but no spoilers. But there are people who have a lot to gain, and because there are other relatives that if she's implicated, if the heir is implicated, which he could be too, then there's people next in line that could stand to benefit, and there's so many other reasons that could be coming up. So Jane has to get to the bottom of this, and of course she does. And it was a good book. I liked it. I would say it's not like, oh my goodness, I just can't wait to read the rest of that series. It's the kind of thing that I won't mind reading the rest of the series, but I'm not rushing to, if that makes sense. So perfectly recommendable. If this sounds like something you would like, then it would be. If you like reading about Jane Austen and you're willing to suspend a little bit of disbelief as far as timelines and why that could happen and how there would be hidden diaries of hers, then go for it. And so I've talked so much about Jane Austen already the past couple months, so I love Jane Austen so much, but I'm little Jane Austen out, so let's move on. Now, the other thing I'm almost never tired of is Sherlock Holmes. So we're going to talk about, now we're into my library books, and this is A Scandal in Scarlet, which I finished, I think, at the very end of August. I don't even know what month I'm in anymore. There's a kitty cat in the front. Do you see the kitty cat? That's Moriarty. So this is where Cape Cod comes in. This is Gemma Doyle, who's from England, but she lives now in West London, Cape Cod, and we're on Cape Cod. And she runs a bookshop that is basically a Sherlock Holmes bookshop, and other mystery writers too, but Sherlock Holmes is the main draw. A lot of people come in to buy all kinds of Sherlock Holmes stuff, like DVDs and cardboard cutouts of Benedict Cumberbatch. It's kind of fun. And I didn't realize when I took this out of the library, I was in such a happiness about getting books out of the library and putting them on hold, that this is probably the fourth book, not the second book. I had read the first one earlier this year, so thankfully it didn't give away a lot of spoilers, really, but it did have a few things that I said, wait, that didn't happen. Oh, I guess it did. So it's almost cozy, but in a more summery way, because it takes place near beaches and a lot of boats and yacht club situations. So in this situation, there is a museum that has a fire, so now it's in need of repairs and needs to raise money, and the new director is a very bitter recently divorced woman, and she gets killed. And shortly before she gets killed, she was seen having a bit of a tiff with a woman who ran a shop across the street from where this auction to raise money was going to take place, and it takes place at the tea room. I think it was the tea room next to the bookshop. Thereabouts. They're connected. And which I love the idea of. Yes, sorry. My fantasy of having a tea room bookshop is just, with a cat and a dog, whatever, just never stops. And so I get a little bit wrapped up in that fantasy. And so she gets killed, and of course Gemma Doyle discovers her body, which seems to happen all the time. So I'm not going to say any more than that, except for the fact that there are also in this situation people that could be interested in doing away with her. So who can it be, and why would they do it? But Gemma finds a way, because this woman, the shopkeeper across the street, is a very disagreeable woman, but she still asks Gemma as a favor to look into it, which she does. With her friend, Jane. Yes, her name is Jane. How could I forget her name is Jane? My cat's name is Jane. With her friend Jane, and, with also help from the police, because she's dating a policeman, like a detective. So, sometimes she's seen as being a little bit in the way, but also she's helpful, that kind of situation. Kind of like Sherlock Holmes. That's how it goes. It was, again, pretty cozy as a mystery. More hobnobbing with the rich, which is, I think, all my books this time. I think this is just up my alley as far as not, finest literature ever, but just wanting to exist in a little world of bookshops and boats, and even though I get seasick, and cats and dogs and happy, vacationing people. It's kind of, it feels like a fantasy, because this year didn't really have that kind of feeling for me whatsoever. Didn't get to go to the beach. I could live without it. But anyway, so yeah, also a very decent book. Not again, nothing of these two books screams, oh my goodness, I have to read the rest of the series before I die, but more of, it'll be nice to get to the next book or the previous book. Like, I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not like, oh my goodness, I can't wait. No cliffhanger feeling. There's another series, but this is much further down in the series. I might have missed a few books in between, because there are bits that are referred to that I don't remember ever reading. Be that as it may. This is Laurie R. King's Riviera Gold. This is the Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes series, which I really like. Like I said, there are a couple of books that in the series that I'm not as into, but this one is really good. It takes place, not surprisingly, in the French Riviera, and also in Monaco, Monte Carlo, and all that stuff. That kind of world does not interest me whatsoever. So I kind of, I was almost going out of the bye. That kind of stuff doesn't really interest me. But the story was good enough. And I don't know what to say about this without giving away some really important plot points of previous books. So I will say that Mary Russell was previously in Venice with Sherlock Holmes, who basically goes incognito, because this is like 1925, and who would believe that this man in his 60s is Sherlock Holmes and real, But Mary Russell, of course, believes. But anyway, so in going to Monaco, she decides to look into a friend, a person that they are both acquainted with, who had moved in interesting circumstances to Monaco, and when she tracks this person down, shortly afterwards, this person is implicated in a murder. So, of course, she has to help figure out how to take this person out of suspicion, with the help of Sherlock Holmes, and to find out who actually did it. And to do that, she comes across so many people that are actually real. The Murphys, the Gerald and Sarah Murphy, their names are, who I'm not very familiar with, but let's see, we got the Fitzgeralds, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda. Pablo Picasso pops up again in here. I'm missing a few people, and there's a famous criminal arms dealer who I don't really know much about, but I looked him up, and he was a very scary person at the time that they have to have certain dealings with. And a certain actress person later in her life, who is rumored to be the inspiration of Conan Doyle's for Irene Adler. So it's kind of fun to put someone who is the inspiration as a character in the story. So I would say I liked Riviera Gold. I'm doing the Fall into Reading Challenge, and if I really wanted to stretch it, this could go as mystery. This could be thriller. There are boat chases. There are all kinds of running around doing things and casinos and stuff like that. And even historical fiction. This could go in historical. If I don't read any historical fiction, this would fit in just nicely. So I might do that. We'll see. A little bit misleading. I don't know if you noticed this, but the way she's posed, her hand is kind of on her belly. And I thought, does this mean that she's pregnant? I know it sounds weird because I sometimes stand like that, but I was like, why would they have her standing like that? What was the artist trying to portray? But I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to solve mysteries that aren't there. I am not a detective. I'm not that observant. But so when I see something that looks a little different, I jump on it and probably shouldn't. I'd be the unhelpful person in a Sherlock Holmes mystery. Like, who's that guy in Sherlock? Anderson or something? But anyway, so what I liked and what I didn't like. What I liked was, yeah, it was a fun adventure. You know, I'm not big into the whole rich people all over the place thing, and Mary Russell is quite wealthy, so sometimes she too easily can throw money around. That sometimes is annoying, but sometimes it actually helps move the plot, so okay, you know. What I didn't like, and this is not the fault of the writing, is just that the past books, many of them have been taking place away from England, and that's okay. Like, a lot of, for instance, I like Poirot, and quite a few of his books take place in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, on cruises, all over the place. So you can't necessarily say that that's bad. It's just that I kind of miss London. Okay, when I say that, I don't just miss London myself, because I didn't get to go this year. I mean, I miss the Sherlock Holmes relationship with London, and even just England itself. But I know that in the Sherlock Holmes original stories that there were plenty of times that Sherlock Holmes left London, and that's fine. But I just feel like, I don't know, so many of the recent books took place, I think it was Japan, and Italy, and France, Monaco, all these places. And there's hints that the next one's going to take place in Romania, which can't necessarily, well, it might not be bad, but I don't know. I would like just a little bit of that feeling of, you know, Sherlock Holmes back in, you know, where he's most famous for being, if that makes any sense. But that's not a criticism of the book itself, and if that doesn't bother you, then this book will totally not bother you at all. I recommend the series in general. You know, even the ones that are a bit not as good are still good. So I totally recommend the series. There's a little bit of a competition between herself, Mary Russell, and Sherlock Holmes that, even though it can seem annoying at times, it kind of makes for an interesting, you know, story. Sometimes she will, just wanting to get the upper hand in the investigations, she'll sometimes put herself in almost dangerous things, but not in like an I Love Lucy trying to get into Ricky's show. Not like that. Because that used to annoy me so much. I don't care what you say. So anyway, I'm going off into tangents and it's getting a bit late. So I will wrap it up. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books, any of these series, what you think. With the Jane Austen one, if anyone's read this, if you think I should keep going. I think I don't mind keeping going, but I don't know if I'm just extremely eager to do so yet. Whatever. If you like talking about mysteries and tea and many other things, please subscribe. And if you want to get notifications, ring the bell, etc. All the things. This is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and mystery-filled day. Goodbye.